Hey, everybody. And thank you, Megan, for the opportunity to moderate this awesome panel, especially in light of recent developments that threaten, not just the nation's security, but perhaps the social order. I'm not talking about AI. I'm talking about the Knicks being 2 wins away from the NBA Finals championship. Celtics fans up here, it's really, really concerning. Yeah. No, but I'll do my job in a minute and start asking these fine folks questions. Just a quick housekeeping note. We will have time for questions at the end, probably about 5-10 minutes. Please keep your questions in the form of a question. Other than that, let's get into it. I think we are going to talk about AI, of course, and I think more broadly, this notion of critical infrastructure protection has just gotten more and more high profile over the last 5-6 years at the very least. But AI is really animating a lot of the discussions today with the recent security executive order. And of course, the Mythos advancements and other advancements with these large language models and with these AI models. I'd love to just get the panel's kind of initial viewpoints to level set a little bit. What are some of the biggest challenges when it comes to critical infrastructure protection and cybersecurity today as you see it? Kirsten, we can start with you and go down the line.
Sure. Thank you. Well, and thanks very much for the opportunity to have this conversation. Looking forward to the perspectives on the panel. I think first, we sort of need to step back and look at the threat. And I'll talk about this from the perspective of critical infrastructure. While MasterCard is not critical infrastructure in the United States, it is identified as critical infrastructure in some other countries, UK, Australia. But the idea of how we're underpinning the digital economic infrastructure and what we see, I think gives us visibility to share a little bit more about the threat. And I think as we see the threat, it's sort of looked at in two perspectives. Right now, we see a real challenge with fragmentation globally. And so the inability to share as readily telemetry and data, and we're seeing this both in commerce and defense. But importantly, obviously, we see the acceleration of technology and innovation from a vulnerability perspective. And we see that with LLMs being used. We just saw the last year, Reported Future had a state of security report from 2025, where they documented the first AI-powered ransomware, Prompt Lock, where you saw LLMs being used to generate malicious scripts. We're seeing that there is AI-powered deep fakes, videos, but importantly, the most urgent threat is identity-centric failures, where we're seeing the opportunity to just log in and not break in, where you don't have to actually take down firewalls, you just need to steal credentials. So if we look at all of this, then what do we do? And I think, where MasterCard is positioned, in 2025, we saw 175 billion transactions. But if you marry the insights that we see from the payments networks and the digital ecosystem with what we're seeing from Recorded Future and threat intelligence, we're able to identify emerging patterns. And I think that's where we get to this predictive intelligence piece, because the vulnerabilities, as we've talked about, we're seeing the adversary pre-position itself on our networks. We're seeing patience being used against us. We're not able to see all of the pre-positioning. We know that it's there. But our ability to understand where the threats, not just where they are, but where they're coming from, has never been more important. So as we're seeing what the threat environment is, particularly with critical infrastructure, being able to offer predictive intelligence, being able to say, we're seeing this threat, but we're seeing how the actor is pre-positioning for this country using these tools for the future, that helps us create more resilience and helps us to arm critical infrastructure globally to be more resilient against that threat.
Seth, the Office of the National Cyber Director just released a national cyber strategy a few short months ago. Feels like forever ago, but critical infrastructure is, of course, a pillar under that strategy, pillar 4, I believe. So how are you getting after that?
Yeah, so a couple things. First, zooming out, like critical infrastructure, as you all know, as well as anyone, but across the White House is a priority to say these underpin not only our national security interests, but also communities and towns across the country. And the number of times where that comes up in conversation, where it's like, what does this mean for the water utility? What does this mean? It's top of mind. And I think you see that in the national cyber strategy to say, like, our critical infrastructure has, what are the vulnerabilities and issues that we need to start tackling and continue to tackle? I'd say from the challenge side, I'd say a couple things, and then zoom back out to the cyber strategy itself. First, I think the first challenge that we've repeatedly seen is that cyber adversaries don't really think twice before attacking critical infrastructure, right? Whether that's a nation state actor or a cyber criminal. We've seen that repeatedly where, we have an opportunity to really change their calculus and ensure that there's cost when they are targeting critical infrastructure in the US. And second, I think on the, insecure technology and thinking of legacy systems as well, like those, there's a lot of tech debt that's been built up across critical infrastructure. Think of, again, whether that's a large company or a small utility, there's a lot of opportunity to say, what are the ways that we can continue to replace those with secure technologies that are built with security in mind and are built with the right defenses and depth in place. Because we can patch all day. We should get better at doing that, but ultimately, we have to move to a more proactive posture. And I think it's really exciting to see the innovation that's happening sort of third in the AI space. I know we'll talk about that probably in a minute, but with that innovation and the amazing automation that's happening, we also see that, the existing patch lifecycle is sort of not working in the way it was. You can argue whether or not it was working a couple of years ago, but certainly is not working in the current moment, right? Like the ability for an organization to say, hey, I've patched all my vulnerabilities and I'll think about mediums and lows later just doesn't work in the current moment. And the ability to both leverage AI for defensive purposes and work faster and more effectively at speed and also build in defense in depth is going to be really critical. And I think the reason why I mentioned those three is I think you see all of those woven through the cyber strategy. The pillars right around really shaping adversary behavior, as you said, on pillar 4, hardening critical infrastructure. And pillar 3, on the flip side, is we need to do the same thing for our own federal civilian networks, right? We don't need to just ask critical infrastructure to fix their issues. We need to eat our own dog food and ensure that we're doing that across our federal civilian networks and our national security systems. And we can't do that without the last two pieces of the strategy, which are, one, ensuring innovation across, think of AI, quantum, other emerging technologies. And last but not least, the workforce piece, right? None of this happens if we don't have smart humans and working with agents and other capabilities to be able to get after this. And all of those require us across government and across private sector to be working together. None of those pillars can work, including the critical infrastructure side.
I just want to stick with you really quickly. I think when the strategy came out, there was discussion about critical infrastructure pilots. And I'm wondering, I know it's only been 3 months, but any updates to share? How are those progressing? Any details on those fronts? Yeah.
So on the pilot front, the concept behind that is to say there's a lot of critical infrastructure across the US, right? A lot of those are in that long tail where, they're the proverbial local utility who does not have enough staff to be able to effectively defend themselves against a nation state actor, for sure. Not a fair fight. How can we come alongside and work between public and private sectors to bring and test innovative capability that they might not otherwise have access or easy access to, and essentially help them to do that in a way that demonstrably changes their security posture. So let's say, hey, here's a white paper, have fun reading and translating this to your environment, but more, how can we go hand in hand with them to change the security posture in their environment and say a small water utility or a rural hospital or a key dependency for next to a military installation. So a few things I'd share there. One, we're already working on a couple of those. We have some more that we're continuing to explore, but we've already seen some interesting work. You've probably seen CISA and some others talking about some of the work they're doing on defense critical infrastructure. So that's been part of the work that we're doing as well, because so many of these military installations have key dependencies that in many cases need a single voice and help from the federal government and from private sector to be able to improve their security posture.
Thank you. Matt, you've been looking at this issue, working on this issue for a long time. Your former agency at CISA, now at GDIT. What do you think are some of the most pertinent challenges and opportunities in critical infrastructure cybersecurity protection?
So right now you've got an industry across, when we start talking about critical infrastructure, it's really about things we all depend on for life safety and other national critical functions. Those are broken into currently haves and have-nots. There's the large enterprises that have very expensive tools that allow them to be dynamic when new threat information is provided. Those entities that can't react dynamically to new threat information are the problem. They are the ones that are going to be a part of that supply chain that doesn't have the money, the people, the speed, the scale to operate that way. There is another side of that sliding scale where technology is becoming cheaper, more available, more available to be as a shared service to do that predictive aspect that we heard. I think predictive is where everybody wants to be. Like, how do I evaluate my system for trends and things that are coming? And in the past, that's been a very expensive question. And getting it to a point where, is it a federal role? Is it a state role? But where can we start to probe and get that predictive analysis in place so that we can actually have real priorities in front of anyone that has any system that we depend upon? And so having that prioritization is going to be as key as the security tools that they have on site. And that's where we're looking at, how do we start with states? How do we work with the federal government? How do we integrate those partnerships to where municipalities, where the small co-ops, the pipeline for the DIB, like all of those elements that make up the supply chain for what we do every day aren't necessarily built for advanced cyber threats. They're not necessarily built for advanced user threats either. And so there's a lot going on in which we try to make automated decisions, automated predictive analysis, something that can be provided at scale to those individuals and services providers so that it's not as hazardous as it is today.
And we're going to get into, of course, sharing information across that really diverse critical infrastructure sets of organizations that you mentioned. But I want to make sure we get to Nate here because you have a really interesting perspective from Lawrence Livermore, of course, the test beds that you run. What can you tell us about what you're learning about threats to critical infrastructure, how to best defend against them?
Yeah, well, Seth took the words right out of my mouth a few minutes ago. It is not a fair fight. We have nation state level adversaries going up against all critical infrastructure, which is, the big, well-resourced utilities, the very small utilities. That's not fair. One of the places we do a lot of work with is the island of Guam, the territory of Guam. They have a very impressive group of folks there that try very hard, but they are also squarely in the target of, our number one adversary. And so finding a way to help even that fight is critically important. And the idea that we're going to build a system that's secure enough that the adversary can't get in just isn't realistic. Our nation state level adversaries have too many resources at their disposal between network intrusion, supply chain compromise, close access operations, placing insiders. They will find a way to get in. And so our focus has been on using a layered defense approach to try to make it as difficult as possible at each step for the adversary to achieve their objectives. And it starts with understanding the critical infrastructure system. So understanding that how the cyber piece and the physical infrastructure come together to form a system, how those are interdependent from other sectors, particularly energy, water, transportation, communications. Those are the big four that we tend to care about the most. And then understanding how bad things can happen. If an adversary is trying to achieve a goal, where would they attack in your system? Where are the most likely targets? Where should you focus on looking for the adversary? Once we understand the system, we do our best to keep the adversary out. A lot of this is securing the supply chain, securing the software that goes into our system, securing the hardware and the devices that go into our systems. But then they're still going to get in. So how do we build advanced detection capabilities that can detect persistent threats? Again, our focus is not so much the attackers who come and try to lock up your system, deface your system, make a big splash. It's the China, it's the Russia who want to get into the system, burrow in, and just sit quietly and wait until they really need it. And then you'll find out, oh, my power doesn't work, or the cranes and the ports don't work. So detecting those really subtle threats. And then the last piece of that is we're going to miss some. So how do we take advantage of the distributed, diverse nature of critical infrastructure to build in resilience and build in the ability to operate through compromise? So even if part of your system is compromised, you're still able to accomplish your mission.
Interesting. Well, let's talk about the AI security executive order because that gives us a lot to really consider and chew on. Of course, there is the 30-day review period that everyone is talking about. It also encourages AI developers to provide critical infrastructure entities with early access to AI systems to strengthen cybersecurity protections. You know, will some of those mechanisms that are now emerging from this security executive order, how can they be best effective to secure critical infrastructure against the threats that you have all talked about? And of course, now with this really quickening pace between vulnerability detection and exploit creation that AI is now creating. I'm curious if we can start with you again.
Sure. I mean, I'll focus on one part of the EO, which is the clearinghouse, because
Yeah.
I think this is a very interesting structure. When you first see it, it's this, well, are people going to share? And I would sort of push us back to the late 90s with the ISACs, the Information Sharing and Analysis Centers, when those were created by sector. And there was this sense of, hey, sectors aren't going to share information with their competitors. But what ended up happening was the threat environment evolved in such a way that it made that type of community and that type of exchange critical to security. It's this idea of collective defense. We're all better when we're working together. And I think if we push this forward, from my time at CISA, there was the Joint Cyber Defense Collaborative. We were joking before this panel about, the term public-private partnership has certainly lost its meaning. It's what does it mean to activate it? And so the JCDC was really about that operational collaboration. And in 2021, the Log4Shell incident was about entities sharing that information with CISA. It was actually somebody at CISA who developed the remediation for it from that information. And I think that that's very critical. So when we think about this clearinghouse, the two pieces that are really important are what we're all talking about is the cybersecurity environment. What we're facing from the challenges that hasn't really changed. What has changed is speed. Right, at all costs, what we're seeing, the compression time from the identification, exploitation, remediation, that speed is unprecedented. There was an article talking about how Mythos exploited a vulnerability in under 31 minutes that went from a patch to being able to, a vulnerability from being able to exploit it. So that compression time is something that we're all dealing with. And what this means is no entity and no sector is going to be able to do it by itself. And I think it's fascinating to think about the clearinghouse from a cross-sector perspective and how we're going to share that information and what collaboration looks like. Because the key now for the future is really going to be collaboration at speed, how we're sharing that information. So there are a lot of elements, and I think, the AIEO is really talking about time when you look at the 30 days and other pieces. But from the perspective of industry, we have to be working together to understand where we're seeing the threats, and importantly, what we're doing and how we're going to share some of that remediation time, because the compression between when we identify that exploit, when we're able to remediate, that is where the success comes from. And I know we'll get into this conversation about AI for defense and AI for good. But I think the piece here now is how industry is going to work together to be able to share that information and what we'll do with it to be stronger and to be more resilient.
Any lessons from the creation of JCDC and other likewise efforts in terms of pulling in, especially the have-nots in critical infrastructure, into these types of mechanisms, because there are hundreds of thousands of entities out there? How do you find the right ones, get them the information, and then help them action it?
It's a great question, because I think supply chain security is going to be even more important with AI. I think, one of the things that MasterCard is very focused on is helping small businesses. We all know that we're only as strong as the weakest link. I think COVID was a fascinating demonstration. You saw large manufacturing companies that were firewalled 6 ways to Sunday, but they came down because they had a small business that was not digitally resilient when we went all digital. I think it's looking at how do we build out that ecosystem of trust, and how do we build out the ecosystem of security. So from the perspective of sectors, it's the responsibility of industry to bring in those businesses to invest in them. As MasterCard looks at working with small businesses, it's all about the connections within the digital supply chain and economic infrastructure. And we really, it can't be discriminating. I mean, I think going back to the ISAC model, at first it was, well, we're only going to bring in the big companies. And it got to a place of, no, we've got to be bringing in everybody. I think the opportunity with AI means that we have the ability to be more inclusive. We'll talk about the challenges, but AI actually has the ability to help smaller businesses become stronger. If we use AI as a tool, they can become more secure. They can be brought into these conversations but importantly, brought into the structure of the sharing. And I think for all the things that when we're automating about remediation, when we're automating to protect, we can automate for the ability to actually secure offensively, to secure in a more effective way. So the models, I mean, what JCDC has done and evolved over time, it's bringing in where we're going to find the greatest effort. But I think the better model are the ISACs and the sector-specific entities, and then how we're working cross-sector to bring them together.
Seth, the National Cyber Director's Office is laced throughout that AI Security Executive Order. A lot of important work there. What are you focused on specifically?
Yeah, so I think zooming out, it's a really exciting moment, right? When you see the innovation that's happening in the AI space, and I think, yes, they're important to think smartly about the security implications of that, but there's also, to your point, so many opportunities that come from both a security and innovation perspective. Literally, like every single top model right now is coming out of a US lab, and that's not something that we should take for granted, right? And I think from that perspective, what we really focused on in the EO is ensuring that it does two things. One, that it continues to accelerate that like responsible innovation from US frontier labs. They can continue to do the good work that they're doing and ensure that we're doing that smartly. And also ensuring as we're doing that, that security is, that those are built with security in mind, right? And so as we look across both how those models are used, in the EO, you'll sort of see a couple different categories, right? So you'll see our national security systems, you'll see our federal systems across the FSEB, and then you'll see critical infrastructure, right, in the broader community. And I think those are very intentional from our perspective because those in many ways are the different ways that we can, from a security perspective, can use and accelerate those efforts. So like if you look at the federal civilian executive branch agencies or FSEB, right, in the EO, working right now with CISA and OMB to say, how do we accelerate if you're a federal CISO to bring on additional tooling and to ensure that the tooling you have is working faster and more effectively, right? I think for too long, federal environments have dragged behind the private sector in terms of what their security and like state of the art in terms of their security posture, defense in depth, et cetera. And that, certainly not limited to, but also includes bringing on additional AI tooling to be able to do those defensive measures at speed and also at scale, right? That's the other thing that I think AI is changing, the ability for a threat actor to, do this at a different scale than they probably could if you're relying on human speed. On the critical infrastructure front, I think touch on two things. One, the clearinghouse. And I think that the clearinghouse will be really important because when you see, especially across, say, for example, open source, right? How do we ensure that we're not, as we're doing security scans across open source, we're not missing key packages, and we're not wasting a bunch of tokens pointing it at the same 3 libraries, right? So there's that piece. And then also when those vulnerabilities are found, how do we ensure that we've done a good job working again as a public-private voluntary partnership to do the right level of validation so that those maintainers are not completely overwhelmed with a mountain of vulnerabilities that only of which a small percentage of them are actually like exploitable, for example, right? And so doing that on the front end will really help us to build the right posture and improve the security of those. Again, that's open source is one example, but you could draw that out across different sectors, across different uses. And then I think on the framework piece that I would say, and I'll steal a line from Sean, the National Cyber Director, is like, this is really the first time that we've seen this level of kind of nation state level innovation capability come purely out of the private sector. And that means that it does have national security implications. And we want to work smartly again in a public-private context to say, what are those national security implications? What are those implications for, say, critical infrastructure? And how do we think about those smartly as the next set of models and the models after that and the models after that come out to ensure that that's resulting in more innovation and more security and not the opposite of that.
Matt, we were talking about the new AI binding operational directive that CISA released just this morning. I know it's targeted at federal agencies, but it talks about shifting to more prioritized vulnerability management. more broadly, why is that concept important? How can we shift toward that for critical infrastructure as well?
Good news about the federal binding operation, or BODs, is that it's really not a smoke signal. Everybody gets an industry like, hey, you should do this too.
Yeah.
And so there is really a signal absent a forcing function with these messages that CISA gets to put out. What this particular document outlines is, as there are hundreds or thousands of vulnerabilities that come out of these clearinghouses, if there are priorities that are directed, these are the amount of days that the federal partners have to remediate and follow implementation on their systems. So if it is something that is a known exploit that's being exploited, has access to the internet, is currently listed at that clearinghouse, if it hits all three yeses, that's a 3-day or less turnaround time. It gets to where if it's not on the internet, or if it's not all the way on the system that can be accessed, not on the KEV list, it might be something that you can do with your next modernization effort. So it's a rising sliding scale on how prioritized things have to be based on things coming out of the clearinghouse. Now, we're used to a binding directive coming out saying, there's a router that has to have this firmware. This one is not that specific, except to say this is going to be the rules of the road moving forward. And so it allows all of our SOCs across the country, all of our partners to say, okay, this is the new triage that we have to put in place for both risk management. Now, I will tell you, anything that says anything in days, weeks, months, it is not going to satisfy a traditional CISO right now. They have seconds, minutes, a day. And so it is going to be it's a government pace that they're putting realism behind, but at the same time, it's a live fire challenge that all critical infrastructure is going to have to deal with. So as a product of, like, say, for example, the next Mythos or the next OpenAI, the next frontier model comes out and it identifies a significant access vulnerability to a lot of our edge or endpoint devices. That's something that clearinghouse is going to have to then turn and be very loud about. To Kirsten's point, they're going to have a megaphone. They're going to have to be out loud and proud about how everyone needs to approach this, because they're not going to be able to push a patch to address it nationally, but they're going to need to have it, because there are certain devices that are in almost 50% of critical infrastructure out there, especially when it comes to those edge devices. And so there is going to be a pressure balance on getting this out.
Nate, oh yeah, please go ahead.
One quick thing to that, because I think, we've seen that some of the models are coming out with sort of safer models. We saw Fable and others, and with guardrails. And I think what's just really important, following off of what Matt said, is while the companies can put those in, it does not take away from the opportunity for those guardrails to be jailbroke. And so I think that we've got to really be thinking through all of this. It's great that that has to happen, and commend the companies for doing that. But as we're thinking through this, the goal and the vision has to really be looking at always being ahead of the adversary, and making sure that those safeguards are resilient, but that they're always improving.
And from a national security systems perspective, even in that 30-day window in which that model's in the hands of the clearinghouse, that's too late.
Yeah.
Like, from a national security system, they have to be ahead of that. And so critical infrastructure gets like a little bit of a lead time with the folks over at DOW and others hardening their systems in advance of what may come, to have some lessons learned to build upon.
Nate, I just want to turn to you, because I know your Skyfall lab, cool name, is testing a lot of has been testing a lot of these things that we're talking about, both AI for cyber defense, AI machine learning for cyber defense, and how adversaries might use AI to target energy grid systems and things like that. So what can you tell us about that work, what you're learning, and how it could inform some of these national efforts that are ongoing?
Yeah, absolutely. So just a word of background, our Skyfall laboratory is a capability that allows us to take real physical hardware that exists in critical infrastructure systems, integrate it with our high performance computing simulation environment, so we can understand effects on individual real devices, but then understand how those propagate to system level scale, because we don't really care about effects on devices, we care about effects on systems. And so we've absolutely been using that to help understand AI and the role of AI in critical infrastructure. And actually want to maybe take a step back and broaden the thinking on that just a little bit, because a lot of the focus has been on using AI to find vulnerabilities in software and devices, and that absolutely is something important to think about. But AI also helps upskill the adversary in a lot of different ways. One of the really important things about cyber attacks on critical infrastructure is bringing the right level of expertise to, I guess I'm saying the important thing from the attacker side, bringing the right level of expertise to that problem. You have to understand how the cyber system works in order to get in and get your access. But if you don't understand how the underlying infrastructure system works, the effects you make are going to be random. If you look at a lot of the early attacks we've seen on critical infrastructure systems, they are break in, cause chaos, get out. The impact of that is a temporary disruption. You get someone in there who really understands how the power grid works, how a water system works, and they make the right manipulations, suddenly you're dealing with a whole different level of problem. And AI helps the adversary learn about those systems and can help them not only find their accesses, find their vulnerabilities, but design those attacks. And so when we think about AI and the use in critical infrastructure, we think about risk in four different categories. One is, and this is an important one too, unintentional failure friendly AI. We trust an AI system to run our systems. It hallucinates. You push it beyond its boundary, it messes up. That is a very real risk. Second mode of risk is adversary attacking the AI itself. So trying to cause your AI to make incorrect decisions, disrupt your training data, extract sensitive information from the AI models. Third category is what we were talking about before. It's the adversary using AI to design and execute their attack. And then the fourth category is we have to understand AI software. Software has its own vulnerabilities. And so thinking about the common libraries, the common components that are used in these AI models and thinking of them as attack vectors. So we try to think about risks on all four of those areas, at the same time understanding the true benefits of AI, because it's not just a risk thing. It can have a lot of positive impacts as well. And so our focus has been on working with, in particular, DOE CSER and their AI Forts program to design, build, and deploy a series of test beds that address those risks. One of them focuses on understanding an AI model's susceptibility to manipulation and other adversary attacks on the AI itself. There's a second one that focuses on measuring and quantifying the functionality and performance of the AI model. How well does it perform the task it's designed to perform? And a third one that helps aid in the adoption of the AI. Basically, the simple way to think about it, it makes an AI show its work to competent humans who can then say, yes, it's coming to the right conclusion. And by the way, it's getting there for the right reasons. So that we can build that confidence to use that in our systems.
Those test beds are operational today or being built out?
Various stages. So we've got one of them that is operational. We're actually starting to work with industry partners now to test their models. There are others that are in various stages of development, but we hope to get those out and connect with the asset owners and the capability owners very soon.
Interesting. Well, stay tuned on that. One question that struck me as all of you were talking was just how I think, Matt, you said clearing houses, because there's multiple clearing houses. There's the federal one that's just starting to be built. I'm guessing maybe you're referring to like Project Glasswing from Anthropic and related efforts like that. I mean, how do those come together to effectively address this problem? Should they come together, or how are they coordinated?
Well, and right now it's not just domestic. There's international partners that are doing this. There's a global approach, similar to the way MasterCard's taking this on. And there's a lot of information sharing that does kind of go from international body to industry and industry to the home front. And so there is a lot of telephone game that goes on with those. The good news is there's a lot of people taking a lot of looks at this. And so the coordination is not perfect right now, but at least all the partners at the table all have each other's cell phone. So it's not an exclusive club to the extent that information stays inside a bubble.
Interesting. And Seth, the Office of the National Cyber Director, obviously in a position to kind of oversee a lot of those federal efforts, at least, and use the power of persuasion to bring in industry. I mean, what can you say about that effort to kind of oversee this at a national scale?
Yeah, I mean, I think to our earlier discussion around public-private partnerships, it takes both sides bringing sort of their best to the table, right? And that means maybe there's other pieces that flow into that of things that is just industry to industry working together, and then they together bring their best, or they're bringing individual pieces, but ultimately, ensuring that that's given to, for example, from the critical infrastructure perspective, in a clear, coherent way for how that infrastructure entity can prioritize and makes their own security decisions, right? So it's a good thing to have a plethora of different ways that industry and government are working together, but ensuring that those are all, at the end of the day, presenting a coherent message to the end user, if you will, from a critical infrastructure perspective or a federal CISO perspective, so they can make quicker, more effective decisions to protect their networks.
The executive order also talks about making AI cybersecurity tools and services available to state, local, critical infrastructure. We've talked a little bit, of course, Nate and others, about how this can be leveraged to really make up some security gains, address both the AI-driven vulnerabilities, but also just broader cybersecurity challenges. I want to ask the panel, I mean, what might be most useful to entities like that could kind of come out of this executive order from ONCD, from agencies like CISA and others to flow down to these entities? Kirsten, any thoughts there?
Well, I'll talk about it from an industry side first. I mean, so I think in kind of just going off of what Seth was saying about how we coordinate and collaborate across infrastructure, industry, and government, I think there's the responsibility, as I sit in industry right now, for industry to share what it's seeing. So from a MasterCard perspective, if we think about fraud, if we think about, protection, which I think all of these things are now becoming linked. It's cyber-enabled fraud when we look at protection of critical infrastructure. So we're seeing work that we're bringing in AI to protect the payment ecosystem. So it's being able now to show red flags to financial institutions to say, hey, we're seeing a synthetic identity being used to open an account. Therefore, by preventing that, we're preventing a malicious actor from getting a foothold in the payment infrastructure. And then when we see that, we're able to flag those signals to other entities. So in sharing that. Another way is being able to spot threat patterns in transaction decisioning. So MasterCard analyzes transactions and is able to signal to financial institutions when we're seeing not just synthetic identities, but when we're seeing transactions that are likely part of fraud. So I think from an industry side, it's getting at that source. We talked a little bit about supply chain security, and we were talking about where the symptoms come from. Industry has a responsibility to look to identify the source and to help prevent, and importantly, share those indicators, not just of compromise, but of interest. One of the things that we talked about at CISA was we're not just sharing what we see from a compromise perspective, but we're seeing, and this goes to the predictive piece, we're seeing when we see an indicator of interest, when something might be happening. And I think that to Seth's point, we've always said cyber is a team sport. You can't do, one entity doesn't do this by itself. It's being able to share that. And I think what is fascinating right now is industry knows its sector very well. There are some sectors that can cut across and have that visibility, but government sits and is able to see cross-sector, which is also why I think in the AIEO, I'm particularly interested in the clearinghouse, because it's really looking at that cross-sector capability. So we have to be able to share these threat signals, importantly, getting to this place of not just what we're seeing and where the threats are, but where we think they're coming from.
Other thoughts? AI tools and services, just building off what Kirsten said.
Yeah, I mean, the challenge is you have a lot of different opportunities with what you can see from the internet. Like the traditional human-centric security tooling we've done is vulnerability management, threat hunting, and attack surface management have been one of the three most valuable techniques and tools we've seen that complements any good SOC, any good network security package. But when we start talking about the clearinghouse prioritizing a lot of speed and scale, we're actually going to need those at speed and scale. And so that action that we're looking to have driven, we need that clearinghouse to really be a home for orchestration. That's the term for taking all of these collaborative efforts and producing group action. And that's where we're going to have a lot of incentives to use AI shared tools that can both be disseminated by states, by CISA or other particular Like, for example, energy has shared resources as well. There's sector by sector resources that are available. I think that you're going to start to see what used to be a challenge to share because it was so subject matter expert dependent. As a deep dive on vulnerabilities of my network, you're going to start to see AI-based tools that are agentic that can actually be sent out and done to networks on behalf of others, and have a privacy quotient to that as well, to where you actually do get to Kirsten's point about predictive prioritization and the ability to have an orchestration at scale to know that certain people are covered down on and certain people still have work to do.
And is there a risk that we get caught up in this AI kind of craze? And we've been talking about cyber hygiene so much for the last 5 years, and we lose a little bit of focus on just the basics at all, or can that happen in concert? I don't know if anyone has thoughts there.
Well, I think it has to happen in concert. I mean, I was actually having this conversation yesterday about, I mean, we can't lose sight of cyber hygiene, but I do think, we're talking about when Nate was saying upskilling, I thought he was going to talk about for our labor force, right? I mean, I know he was going to, but there is this both sides, right? So AI to help us with cyber hygiene. I think that, is going back to the small business piece and small business and cybersecurity. I think AI to help small businesses. That's one of the key elements is cyber hygiene and how you can automate some of these defense tools and what that looks like. But always these things can never happen in isolation. And so we have to be thinking about how they are working in concert.
Yeah, and I think the importance of cyber hygiene is if you haven't taken care of the easy stuff,
Yeah.
the adversaries aren't going to use their best stuff against you. So you got to raise the baseline and force them to at least try. So that's super important. I do want to come back to how we use AI on defense. And I think, the simple way to say that the best defense against a bad guy with AI is a good guy with AI. And so we think about adversaries using AI to discover vulnerabilities and write exploits. We have to think about how the good guys use AI to discover vulnerabilities and write patches. Where that gets challenging is in critical infrastructure systems. Patching is not an easy thing to do. Just because you write a patch doesn't mean you can deploy that patch out into your system or that you'd even want to. And so you have to think of other compensating controls. So vulnerability comes out, an exploit's developed. Maybe you can't patch for months or years. So you write firewall rules, you write detection rules to detect those exploits that are coming in and try to contain that threat. And so a lot of the focus that we've been seeing is taking those AI tools and again, helping to upskill and scale our workforce, just like you were mentioning. So one of the things that we're excited about is the ability to take threat hunting and take our expert threat hunters, encode the way they look at systems into these AI models, and then hand that off to some of the smaller entities who maybe don't have that level of expertise. And you're not going to take a novice and turn them into an expert, but you can take a novice and turn them into someone who's decent, or you can take someone who's decent and make them really good. And so using AI in that sort of way on the defensive way and investing in how can we use AI as defenders, not just the way the adversary is thinking about it, but how do we use it to secure our systems?
I want to hone in on operational technology here, because obviously it's such a key piece of critical infrastructure. On the same day that the AI security executive order was released, CISA released an advisory on automated tank gauge readers and how they were being targeted, and that got a lot less press than the AI security executive order. Reading through it was also somewhat alarming that these types of technologies are being successfully targeted by adversaries in some cases. And so, Nate, maybe we can start with you, because this is so much of what the lab looks at. OT specifically, what are some of the key challenges and opportunities for securing those today that you're working on?
Yeah, so I mean, one challenge is just what I mentioned before. The idea of rapid patching of OT just is not feasible. If you think about the confidentiality, integrity, availability triad, OT has traditionally focused very heavily on availability. The other two not as important, because the idea was that network's isolated. It's not connected to anything. We don't need to worry about security. That's not true anymore. With the increasing conversions of IT and OT, and that doesn't necessarily mean your OT systems are connected to your IT systems, but it means your OT systems use technology that's also used on IT networks in those OT systems. Security becomes a lot more important. Right now, if you can get on an OT network, a lot of times you can communicate directly with the physical devices on that network, issue them commands, they execute them. That they don't have that questioning nature that devices that we've learned to build into things that are on IT systems. That they get a command, they follow it, and so it is very easy. If you can get access to those networks to cause those disruptions. And so we need to think about how we build security into those OT systems without compromising availability. Because again, my desktop computer crashes, I just reboot it and I lose a minute or two of productivity. An OT system crashes, there are physical consequences that are not acceptable. And so trying to build in that security without compromising the availability concern is the biggest challenge with OT.
Seth, I mean, in your pilots with critical infrastructure, the defense critical infrastructure pilot, some of the work that's emerging on AI, I mean, how does OT factor into what you're looking at from your perch?
OT is a big piece. I mean, as Nate alluded to, right, we've seen more convergence between OT and IT over the years, right? And much of that OT, certainly not all of it, but a lot of it has been around for a very long time by design, right? They're high availability systems that are designed to work for 15 or 20 or plus years. And maybe some people are using them even past end of life, right? To keep with integrations with the other systems they're having. And especially as we see sort of the innovation happening in the AI space, I think there's a unique opportunity to be able to say, hey, how do we help some of those small entities who have a lot of OT, maybe out of date, and also there's some new technologies to be able to help test. We're not going to be able to do that everywhere in the US all at the same time, but I think the pilots do have an opportunity, and the concept behind them is to say, hey, let's pick a particular set, pick some technology that we think in public-private partnership and say, let's test these on actual networks, see what works, and then help states, localities, critical infrastructure, help scale those to protect those systems, particularly those that are at the long tail that are just not thinking day in and day out about what's the cutting edge technology that I could be used to protect my water system, my rural hospital, my local power utility, that are not only key dependencies for their own communities, but also for maybe the defense installation that's in that area, for a key dependency for other parts of critical infrastructure or other federal systems.
Just one quick thing, because I think to add on to that, we've talked a lot about the interdependency across sectors. I think what Seth was talking through and Nate, we also have to remember that there's that interdependency to state and local level. And I think that's where OT really comes into play, is making sure that the state and local governments, that the entities in this administration has really invested a lot in pushing resources to the state and local governments. But I think that's going to be super important for the OT security and safety, because there's a psychology to OT breaches when physical things get attacked that really impacts how we're looking at security and safety as a nation and how we're looking at it more globally. So that ability to work more closely with state and local governments, I think on this IT OT convergence is becoming even more urgent than it's ever been.
Well, we have about 10 minutes for questions. So we have some mics that are around the room. Does anyone have a question for our panel? I can keep asking them, but. All right. Well, if something pops up, shout out, whatever. But we want to talk about workforce, I think, as well as part of this panel. I know it's a big part of the cyber strategy. It's a big part of actually the AI security executive order mentions workforce hiring, I think, to the tech force. And when we talk about critical infrastructure, so disparate, so many different entities, I think we've often heard that they lack the workforce in many cases to address these issues. Nate, you just talked a little bit about what your lab is working on as far as pushing that type of AI-driven training, but how do we get around this problem of the cyber workforce, especially in today's day and age with AI driven threats and other things. Seth, can you talk about the National Cyber Directors piece?
Yeah.
There?
The president's directly said that like the cyber workforce in the United States is a national asset and it's worthy of investment, right? And I think in our work around cyber workforce, it's important to think through. There's a lot of different capabilities that exist across the private sector, across various places in government, but there's not a clear, cohesive way for put yourself in the shoes of a small town individual. You're coming up out of maybe middle school or high school. You're like, I'm really interested in cyber. Like, how do you then go from that to then gaining those skills, gaining those capabilities, maybe going into the government, going into a private sector, going back and forth between those entities, right? And so as part of the work around Pillar 6 and the workforce, we're really building what we call the Cyber Academy. And Sean and others in the National Cyber Director's Office have talked about this. But essentially the concept is, how do you, less like a brick and mortar academy, but what does that workforce pipeline look like to be able to ensure that it's local, that it's accessible, and that it works not only for, talent here coming to, government agencies like a CISA or an NSA or whatever, but also for those local utilities, for businesses who are also, struggling to find the right people. And ensure that there's a cohesive way that people can then cycle back and forth between the public and private fields without, losing their security clearance, going through a bureaucratic process, right? How do we make that as streamlined as possible? So I'll mention three things. One, the academy is sort of that overall pipeline. The second is what we're calling the accelerator. And that's essentially like, if you have an interesting idea, how do you then go to get pre-seed money to be able to build that into a workable prototype, right? Knowing that like this is something that we need to continue and accelerate that innovation, and having a place that is an easy way to get that for innovative ideas. And then the last piece is around what we're calling like a foundry, essentially, of like, how do you then, for prototypes that work well, how do you scale those? How do you get those and help innovators get that to market? So I think it's pretty exciting because it sort of approaches the workforce problem from a few different angles, right? From both the accelerating innovation side, but also making it very easy and accessible for people who are either new into cyber or also want to add new skills and retool to be able to do that in a cohesive way across government and industry.
Anyone else just on the workforce piece?
So having 30,000 employees that are under the umbrella of technology at GDIT meant that we have to both blend use case experts with lifetime learners and technology expertise. And so that is a constant cycle where everyone on board has to have that perspective, where they have to evolve their use case knowledge or their technology knowledge, or both, to really to be able to support a large amount of people and a large amount of companies and services at the same time. And so we work with academia, we work with certifying entities to try and get an idea of like, what is that pace watering down to? Like, is it 18 months you have to learn something new? Is it every 2 years that you have an expertise? What are the embed practices where if you have someone that has a very amazing skill that's working on a specific program, how do you lift and shift them to promote them into a more managerial executive position so they can bring more people into that expertise understanding? And it is a full-time job. It is not something that's taken lightly. And while AI does really help support the lifetime learning aspects, as well as really poke at all those use cases for additional implementation, it is a challenge. There's candidly a gap between I just graduated high school or I just graduated college. How do I get that first 1 through 3 years of experience? And that is very, very difficult to get. So we're working with academia to try and do like, hey, can people start getting clearances through agencies at, say, freshman year? And get them in that 18-19 window to where they're expedited into the workforce with a lot of understanding and almost a journeyman approach with academia, so that it's not just this cold start of, okay, I've got a computer science degree, how do I help? Or more recently, a cybersecurity degree, how do I help? I mean, there's really a challenge getting that first rung in the door. And so that's where we're really focusing a lot of our energy right now.
Yeah, I think it's even more of a challenge also because to really effectively work in this space, you need an interdisciplinary skill set. You can't come in with just one background. And this has been a big challenge for us, as I'm sure everyone is how do you find the people who have that background? We partner with universities as well and try to reach out. We haven't found things out there, programs out there yet that produce that interdisciplinary type of skill set. One of the things that we've started to do is we built a summer program where we bring in students from all over the country, various different backgrounds, and really introduce them to the problem of critical infrastructure cybersecurity. The idea is to get them hooked on how important of a mission this is, and get the the electrical engineer, the chemical engineer to talk with their cybersecurity colleague and work together. And over the course of the summer, really familiarize them with these sorts of problems, so that hopefully when they finish school and they go to graduate, that they'll start looking to work in this space, whether it's with us, with other organizations, with the federal government. We've actually been pretty successful of once you get people hooked on the mission, they'll come. We sit out in the San Francisco area region. There's a lot of tech companies there who will pay obscene salaries for folks with skill sets. We want people to come to us, not for that, but because they think this mission is so important to the country. And so building that in while they're still in school is super important.
Just to add on to that, so I mean, I think the investing in the Skills Academy is really important. MasterCard is working with the NICE framework here globally in the EU, with Asia Pacific, Latin America, how we build that out internationally. I think the other piece, though, I'm a big proponent of the interdisciplinary approach to the workforce, because I think it's how do we help individuals see the capabilities and the aptitudes that they have being relevant to the cyber workforce. And it's beyond being a computer scientist or an engineer, but we need historians, we need politicians, we need social scientists, economists, psychologists, psychiatrists, all in this space. And the other piece, it's another way of looking at neurodiversity. I think one of the elements that has been so powerful about AI is that it is taking out some of those necessary qualities that we're investing in engineering, but it's allowing others who may not have those aptitudes to be able to highlight the aptitudes that they do have to bring into that space. But then if you look at neurodiversity, we're seeing companies now that have neurodiverse workforces that are winning large government contracts to build AI algorithms to support this broader perspective and understanding. And so as we're thinking about building out the cyber workforce, it's not just investing in the computer scientists and the engineers, that's obviously incredibly critical, but helping individuals at a young age see themselves in cyber, even if they're not going to go into that engineering perspective. Because if we're truly going to look at these issues to build solutions and to solve problems, we have to make sure that we've got the commitment from this younger generation to say they believe in it, but also to see themselves in how their aptitudes can feed into that. And I think that is a critical element for not just where we are today, but how we're building out the workforce for tomorrow.
Well, our time is up here. So again, how about a hand for a great panel?